Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 36th chapter, as the subheading states, Sennacherib invades Judah. And in this chapter, that's exactly what it goes into. The actual, at the time when Isaiah was on the scene, right? And historically, when you had the Assyrians led by Sennacherib actually come to try and besiege or take over Jerusalem. So keep in mind, think of it like this: how we were prophesying, right? So we prophesy, we go out there weekly, and do these lessons. But every so often, there will be something that actually happens during our life, right? Like, for example, a couple of years ago, you had the whole demic. And when that happened, of course, we did videos on it and so on and so forth. But that was something, regardless of what we prophesy about, whether it's, the kingdom, whether it's, the destruction to come, there's still things that happen in our present time, right? So similarly, as we read, we've gone through a couple of the chapters in the book of Isaiah leading up until this time. Now in the 36th chapter, right, there's the record of when the Assyrians actually came against Jerusalem or against Judah during the time of Isaiah. And I believe there's an account of this also in the book of Second Kings, somewhere around, well, it's actually right there, Second Kings 18. So this is Isaiah chapter 36, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defenced cities of Judah and took them. So I believe Isaiah, if we look up Isaiah here, Isaiah prophet, I believe he did start his ministry before the northern kingdom was deported out of their land by the Assyrians. So he did prophesy even against them as well. And let's see what time they give us. 8th century. Okay, so you know what? Let me do it this way. Let's go back to the blue letter. Blue letter. I almost forgot they have the timeline feature here. Is it chronological map? There we go. So now let's look for the prophet Isaiah, which is right here. There you go. Yeah. So we have the prophet Isaiah here, and we can see here he was there before Hoshea, which was the last king of the northern kingdom. So we see here that leading up until this point, just a refresher, during Isaiah's ministry, you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom that were still in the land of Israel. And due to a rebellion by Hoshea, which was the last king of the northern kingdom, I believe it was Shalmaneser V, which came against them, laid siege to Samaria. You can read about that, siege of Samaria by the Assyrians. And records, secular history at least, shows that you had Sargon II, which was the Assyrian king, right? They have him mentioned as the brother of Shalmaneser V, which ended up completing that siege that was started by Shalmaneser V, and then ended up deporting the northern kingdom into the land of Assyria. And so after Sargon II, his son, which here we have as Sennacherib, later on is the one that ends up coming against Judah here. And the reason he does that is because of the rebellion that was going on in the land, which Judah partook of as well. So here we are, as it says, now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defenced cities of Judah and took them. Now, I looked up here Sennacherib's campaign in the Levant, and the Levant is the region where you have Israel, Coal, Syria as they call it. So it says here Sennacherib's campaign in the Levant in 701 BCE was a military campaign undertaken by the Neo Assyrian Empire to bring the region back under control following a rebellion against Assyrian rule in 705 BC. So that there were a lot of nations in that region that rebelled against against the Assyrians. Now, interestingly enough, let's look up here Sennacherib. That makes sense. So Sennacherib ascended the throne right around 705 BC. So what likely happened is you had as it says here, the death of Sargon II and the succession, right, which would be his son Sennacherib coming up into power. Let's see what it says here a little bit. Maybe this might give credence as to why the nations in the Near East thought it was a good opportunity to rebel against the Assyrian power in the region at the time, right? Because sometimes during a transition of rulers or kings, the kingdom can get weak based on how the transition goes, and these other nations would use that as an opportunity to rebel. Um, let's see what it says here. It says in 705 BC, Sargon, probably in his 60s, led the Assyrian army on a campaign against King Gordy of Tabal in central Anatolia, which Anatolia is what we know as Asia Minor or Turkey. The campaign was disastrous, resulting in the defeat of the Assyrian army and the death of Sargon, whose corpse the Anatolians carried off. Sargon's death made the defeat significantly worse because the Assyrians believed the gods had punished him for some major past misdeed. In Mesopotamian mythology, the afterlife suffered by those who died in battle and were not buried was terrible, being doomed to suffer like beggars for eternity. So you end up dying, you're not buried properly, in the afterlife, you're a beggar. Sennacherib was about 35 years old when he ascended to the Assyrian throne in August of 705 BC. He had a great deal of experience with how to rule the empire because of his long tenure as crown prince. His reaction to his father's fate was to distance himself from Sargon. Fram characterized Sennacherib's reaction as one of the most one of almost complete denial. Okay. Let me see. Okay. It says here, writing that Sennacherib apparently felt unable to acknowledge and mentally deal with what had happened to Sargon. Sennacherib immediately abandoned Sargon's great new capital city, Sharukin, and moved the capital to Nineveh instead. One of Sennacherib's first actions as king was to rebuild a temple dedicated to the god Nergal, associated with death, disaster, and war at the city of Tarbisu. And now I'm trying to see if there's any. Okay, so it doesn't. Mm, yeah, it doesn't state the exact reasoning as to why that might have been a good time. Maybe it does later on, but let's go back to where we were here. Long story short, the nations in the Levant, right, are rebelling against the Assyrians now. Um, at the time of Sennacherib coming up into power officially as king. So he makes a campaign to go in there and to basically shut them down. And that's what leads to them coming up against Jerusalem here as we're reading in Isaiah 36. So let's keep reading on here. Sennacherib's campaign in the Levant in 701 BCE was a military campaign undertaken by the Neo-Assyrian Empire to bring the region back under control following a rebellion against Assyrian rule in 705 BCE. After the death of Sargon II, Sennacherib's father, a number of states in the Levant renounced their allegiance to Assyria. The rebellion involved several small states, Sidon and Ashkelon, which were taken by force, and Biblios, Ashdod, Ammon, Moab, and Edom, who then submitted to the payment of tribute to Assyria. Most notably, Hezekiah of Judah, encouraged by Egypt, joined the rebellion. See that? Joined the rebellion and was subsequently invaded by the Assyrians, who captured most of the cities and towns in the region. Hezekiah was trapped in Jerusalem by an Assyrian army, and the surrounding lands were given to Assyrian vassals of Ekron, Gaza, and Ashdod. However, the city was not taken, and Hezekiah was allowed to remain on his throne as an Assyrian vassal after paying a large tribute. And then it gives an account of the where this is written of in the scriptures. Now, um, you notice it mentioned that he was encouraged by Egypt, and as we were reading in some of the previous chapters, this Isaiah was warning, right? If you remember, Isaiah was warning against the Israel going and making those alliances with Egypt, right? Because they thought that by doing so, they would be able to escape. They would be able to, oh, they got the support, they got the chariots, they got all these things from Egypt. So they're gonna be good now, and they can join in this rebellion. Well, here we are in Isaiah 36, and had it not been for the mercy of the Lord, they would have been cooked. So Isaiah 36 verse 2, and the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh, which is one of his generals, or his chief of staff, whatever you want to call him, but it was a title of somebody high up in his army, you could say, from Lachish to Jerusalem onto King Hezekiah with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool. Now the conduit being like an aqueduct, right? That transported water to the upper pool. And an aqueduct looks something like aqueduct. Yeah, let me see if I can. It basically is built to transport water from one area to another. Here's an example here. Main water source, the city, it goes through the aqueduct. So it says in the highway of the fuller's field, right? And a fuller is like today you go to the laundromat, you get your clothes washed. The fullers did somewhat of an equivalent back then, where they would like, whiten, right? As the term is used, they would whiten or clean garments and stuff like that. So it's like the ancient world's version of a laundromat. Right? It says to wash by treading, and I think I covered this in one of the chapters, might have been in Kings or Chronicles. But as it says, to wash by treading, to be washed, to perform the work of a fuller, to wash garments, to be washed. So you can do more research if you're interested. But it was to clean, and wash clothes and stuff like that. Verse 3. Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, and Shibna the scribe, and Joah, Asaph's son, the recorder. Now, here I want to just take a moment to take a look here at the scribe and the recorder, right? So we have Shibna the scribe and Asaph the recorder, or sorry, Joah, Asaph's son, the recorder, and you know, initially you may think the scribes and recorders will kind of do the same thing, right? Because when you scribe, you write things down like loosely, um, and you record. That's what a recorder does as well, right? They record things, but there's actually a difference, a significant difference, and importance as to why you need both a scribe and a recorder, and what their job meant, how it varied. All right, and in a nutshell, which I'll read it over here, but the scribes did mainly a lot of like preserving, right? They would preserve certain texts, because it's not like today where you can type up a document and 2 decades later you can pull it up from an old email. That's stored on, on the memory or the disk or whatever of your hard drive. In the ancient world, these things were stored on paper, right? They were actually in either papyrus or some form of a scroll, and that material over time would perish. So you needed scribes that would preserve the text by transcribing or rewriting it on fresh scrolls or fresh paper. Okay, and I've made mention before, but when you watch Game of Thrones, that's what this guy Sam Tully, he ended up doing that as well. Okay, so now I pulled up here some information on the role of scribes and recorders. It says here, in the biblical context, scribes and recorders played a crucial role in the and preservation, interpretation, and dissemination of sacred texts and legal documents. Their contributions were vital to the religious, legal, administrative functions within Israelite society and the early Christian community. Now, in the context of the Old Testament, scribes were primarily responsible for copying and preserving the scriptures, right? And this also explains, remember, we're still humans, right? So we're not perfect. And when you are manually, right, scribing something or copying it, there is always room for one or two errors here and there, though not often, it's still possible. Okay. So sometimes you may read, a certain scripture, you may see a scribal error, right, or something like that here and there, and it might not be always from the translators, okay, but it could be a result of just it being like transcribed, right, to be preserved, right. A character was missing or whatever the case is. And obviously, of course, during when you look at the history of Israel, there have been a lot of situations where, like going back to the time of Ezra, where the scrolls were burnt and had to be completely rewritten, right? So it's definitely the spirit of the Lord that has had this word been preserved so well. Okay, this word that is so ancient, that is. Anyway, it says here, they were skilled in writing and often served. Yeah, they were skilled in writing and often served as secretaries or clerks for kings and high officials. The role of the scribe was both a practical and spiritual vocation, as they were entrusted with the accurate transmission of God's word. So, one thing to note here is, just because they didn't have the exact technologies that we have today doesn't mean that they couldn't do similar things, right? Today, you have technology that solves problems of manual labor, right, to a degree. And it's to make it easier to do something that was originally being done, but would seem more tedious now. Okay. So you still had some of the same problems that existed and same solutions, but now they're more, you know, um, automated. Okay, you still had a need to record things down. You still had a need to preserve things, except now instead of doing it more so on paper and physical files and folders, why do you think on your computer you have an object called a file or a folder? Where do you think that concept comes from? It comes from the actual physical files and folders that people would record information in. So the computer was just a way to have it so you don't need a whole storage room full of boxes that you have to flip through papers here and there. Because like if a fire happened and that building got burned down, you would lose that, right? And so today you have a computer, you store emails, you store files, you store folders, but that's so you can record information and preserve it. Well, they were doing that back then. They just did it differently, different means. So anyway, back to the point here, right? Ezra, a prominent scribe, is described as a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord Yahweh, the God of Israel, had given. And that's Ezra 7 and 6. Ezra's dedication to studying, practicing, and teaching the law underscores the scribe's role in religious education and reform. Recorders, on the other hand, were officials responsible for maintaining records of significant events, decrees, and genealogies. See, so there's a difference there. You had the scribes, which are mainly like to um, copy and preserve the scriptures, and then you had the recorders, which are mainly recording the events that would take place, any decrees that were made, and genealogies in those records. That's why when you go into the scriptures, there's such a precise recording of genealogies, because you had people whose jobs it was to specifically record that, and then the scribes would preserve it. So they often times work together. Well, as it's going to go on to tell you, they often worked closely with scribes and were integral to the administration of the kingdom. In 2 Samuel 8 and 16 and 17, we see the roles of both scribes and recorders in King David's administration. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Seraiah was the scribe. Like we just read in Isaiah 36, right? You had the scribe, the recorder. Um, by the New Testament period, the role of scribes had evolved. They were often associated with the Pharisees and were experts in the law. Scribes were influential in the interpretation and teaching of the Torah, and they held significant authority in religious matters. Yahushua frequently engaged with scribes, challenging their interpretations and practices. And then there's an account here in the book of Mark. Despite the deep criticism, the scribes' role in preserving the scriptures was invaluable. Their meticulous work ensured that the continuity and integrity of the biblical text through generations. And here are basically their roles listed out. The primary functions of scribes and recorders included, and just on a high level, you can think of copying and preserving texts. Scribes mainly did that. Recording significant events and records. The recorders did that. So as it says, copying and preserving texts, scribes meticulously copied the scriptures, ensuring that each letter and word was accurately transcribed. This task required a deep reverence for the text and a commitment to precision. Interpreting the law, scribes were often consulted for their expertise in the law. They played a key role in interpreting legal and religious matters, guiding the community in understanding and applying God's commandments. Teaching and instruction. Scribes were educators responsible for teaching the law to the people. They conducted public readings and provided instruction in synagogues and other settings, which kind of makes sense as like a natural segue since they spent so much time reading the law and preserving it. It would make sense that they would have to have a deeper understanding than just like the average individual. 4. Administrative duties. Recorders maintained official records, including genealogies, royal decrees, and historical events. Their work was essential for the governance and organization of the kingdom. The roles of scribes and recorders were foundational to the development and preservation of the biblical canon. Their dedication to their craft ensured that the scriptures were transmitted faithfully across generations. Through their work, the teachings and commandments of God were made accessible to the people, shaping the spiritual and moral fabric of the community. So there's a bit of uh, extra context there about the role of scribes and recorders. So when you read the scriptures and you come across it, you can better understand like why are there two people where it sounds like they're doing the same thing, but they're really not. And what was the significance of having them? Verse 4. So back to the context here. Now we have Rabshakeh sent by Sennacherib. He's here to basically come in and threaten Israel to try and get them to submit. And now you have Hilkiah Salakia, you have Eliakim, Shibna, and Joah, which have now come out to basically meet him. And Rabshakeh said unto them, Say ye now to Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this wherein thou trustest? So you rebelling against me, where from where? You know, what would possibly make you think that you could do this? Verse 5, I say, or I say, sayest thou, but they are but vain words. I have counsel and strength for war. So, in other words, Rabshakeh is saying, from his perspective, you're saying here, right, which is all vain, that you have counsel and strength for war, like you're set against us. Now on whom dost thou trust that thou rebellest against me? See? So who gave you this false sense of confidence to think it was okay to rebel against me? And that's basically that's what this guy is saying. Lo, thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt, whereon if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt to all that trust in him. But if thou say unto me, We trust in the Lord Yahweh our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away? And said unto Judah and to Jerusalem, Ye shall worship before this altar? And this was said from a point of ignorance on the part of Rabshakeh, because, and Rabshakeh, I believe it's more of a title than it is an actual name, but, nonetheless, it's like today when people refer to J.D. Vance as, the vice president rather than just saying his name. Anyway, I say that because they didn't know the internal workings, right, of what was going on in Jerusalem. So from his perspective, he's just like, this God that you trust upon, this is the same God Hezekiah just took down and broke down his altars and all of that, and he's telling you just come and worship here in Jerusalem. But he didn't understand that what Hezekiah was doing was destroying the altars of these pagan or false deities and idols that Jake were worshiping at, and basically saying, no, you worship and sacrifice at the one altar in Jerusalem where the Lord has put his name. So that's why Rabshakeh says this from a point of ignorance. Verse 8, Now therefore give pledges, I pray thee, to my master, the king of Assyria. And the pledges here would be a token of your submission. Similar to how when during the Persian reign, when the Greek city states aided the Ionians in rebelling against the Persians, um, Darius ended up sending his messenger throughout those states to say, hey, give me earth and water as basically like a pledge of your submission, you know, for rebelling against me. So similarly, this Rabshakeh is saying here, yo, basically give me like a tribute and pledge your allegiance back, and we might just spare you. As it says, and I will give thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. Which this was said in like a mocking way, right? Like I could give you these 2,000 horses, but I'm not even sure if you can even find 2,000 horsemen out of your people to even ride them. Verse 9, How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? And in the NLT, it says, With your tiny army, how can you think of challenging even the weakest contingent of my master's troops, even with the help of Egypt's chariots and charioteers? Verse 10, And am I now come up without the Lord Yahweh against this land to destroy it? The Lord said unto me, Go up against this land and destroy it. So now he's He's because remember, like visualize this, right? This guy he's a general in the Assyrian army. He's coming there. He's not coming there to be friendly. He's speaking in a disrespectful, condescending, mocking, you know, tone to our people. Because of his mind, he's like, well, we have the upper hand. So that's why he's saying, like, you trust in the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. You think we're just doing this just because? As a matter of fact, let me let you in on a little secret. The Lord is the one who actually sent us here to come up against this land. Verse 11. Then said Eliakim and Shibna and Joah unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray thee, unto thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it, and speak not unto us in the Jews' language, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. And the reason they said that was because they didn't want uh Jake getting discouraged um based on the threatening words that Rabshakeh was saying. Now the Syrian language here is Aramaic, and Aramaic is likened onto a sister language to Hebrew, though it's still different. Okay. And just because you speak Hebrew doesn't mean that you're going to automatically understand Aramaic, and vice versa. So I looked up here how similar, right, was Aramaic to Hebrew. It said here in the AI overview, Aramaic and Hebrew are closely related Semitic languages, like sister languages, but they are not mutually intelligible. So just because you understand one doesn't mean you can understand the other. While they share a similar vocabulary and sentence structure, they also have distinct features and grammatical differences. Some consider them as similar as Spanish and Portuguese, or Italian and Spanish. Okay, so it's close, it's similar, but it doesn't mean that just because you speak one, you're automatically gonna understand or fully or speak the other. So here they were saying, look, we understand Aramaic. Speak to us in that language. You don't need to say it in Hebrew where everybody, can hear it. But Rabshakeh said, Hath my master sent me to thy master and to thee to speak these words? So you think Sennacherib sent me to just come talk to you and Hezekiah in private? Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, that they may eat their own dung and drink their own piss with you? And he said that as, once again, a mocking but threatening way, as we're about to lay siege to you, and you're about to be so desperate that you're going to end up eating your own dung and drinking your own piss, right? In other words, he sent me to everybody over here because y'all all going to be suffering together if you don't submit. Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and said, Hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus saith the king, Let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, The Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, Make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, and eat ye every one of his vine, and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his own cistern. Which is to say, you make it a deal, you come back and subject to the Assyrians, you're gonna be good. You're gonna be taken care of. You're gonna be eating, drinking, peace. Lies, obviously. Verse 17, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. And the reason he said that is because that was what the Assyrians did, right? When you look into their history, they would take you out of your land and put you in a foreign land, right? Being captives, especially if you rebelled. And that would prevent any more rebellions because you're in a foreign land. You don't know the terrain, you don't know the people. You can't rebel as easily as you would had you been in your own land. And it's like a swap because they do the reverse, the opposite. They put somebody else in your land. So he's saying, look, you submit to us, you'll be good. We'll take you to, a nice new area, and you'll be in good, be chill. Verse 18, Beware, lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Have any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand? So you look at all these nations all around you that we went and conquered and took over, they had their gods. But which one of them's God was able to deliver them out of our hands? So don't be getting fooled by Hezekiah telling you, oh, God, he's going to deliver us here, he's going to deliver us there. You're going to end up just like them if you don't bow down, you don't submit. But see, where he was wrong is that you came against the one. There's a reason why the Most High is known as the one true living God. Okay, all the other gods are no gods; they're idols. And you barked up the wrong tree, buddy. But see, the Lord set it up this way because it's gonna magnify him. Where we at? Right, verse 20. Who are they among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand, that the Lord Yahweh should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? But they held their peace and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was, saying, answer him not. So Hezekiah had basically warned all the people to say, don't say anything when these Assyrians come. No matter what they say, nobody says anything to them. Then came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household, and Shibna the scribe, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh. And the clothes being rent, was a form of distress, mourning, stressed. And that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 36th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kudash. Until next time, Shalom.